You are in the Back to Life, How to Reabandon Underutilized Buildings. Everybody nod, yes, this is where you want to be. This is your new home for the next 75 minutes. I'm Mike Coop with the SHPO, and I put this session together, but that doesn't mean that I'm the expert on this topic. It's more that I've been reading about these projects for several years, these 3 different properties that are going to be featured, and reached out to these wonderful people to tell us about how they've saved their various respective historic buildings in the towns that they're from. And so rather than let me lather on about why this is important as a session, I'm going to just read I think I'm going to do the bios for Jane and Traci first, since you guys are first. Then when you're done, I'll come right back up and move on to the next presenter. So Jane Bisel is one of the principals of Blue Planet Museum Consulting based in Rochester. Jane's background includes experience in grant development and administration, editing, scholarly writing, exhibition development, historic research, and project administration. And I think it's fair to say that the work that she did for the building you'll be hearing about in Rochester probably wouldn't have happened without Jane's expert guidance. And the owner of the building, Traci Downs, is nodding emphatically yes. And that gives me a good segue to introduce Traci. She's the owner with her husband, Hunter, of the Maass and McAndrew building in Rochester. So 5 years ago, Traci and her family moved from Hawaii, where they had been involved in Honolulu's emerging tech scene. She and her husband then moved to Rochester and sort of immediately got involved with a lot of things in downtown. They're also part owners of a business called Cafe Stream, which I think is a coffee shop, right, Traci? Steam, okay. Steam, I said, yeah, sorry. So with that, Jane and Traci are going to tell us about their wonderful project in Rochester. Take it away, guys.
I'm going to give you some context prior to Traci guiding you through the process that was used by the team that she put together to work on this project. As many of you know, we're from Rochester. As many of you know, Rochester has very long been challenged to preserve its historic properties, and with Mayo Clinic growing at a rapid rate and located in our downtown core, we've lost a lot of our historic resources. And especially after 2013, we've had a lot of challenges to have these dialogues with business owners, with Mayo Clinic, with the city, and with the preservation advocates that are concerned with preserving what we have left in South Broadway, historic 3rd, and 4th Street, where this building is located. I have to say that this project probably would not have happened without some diligent advocacy by some of the Rochester preservation enthusiasts for maybe 5 years prior to this project sort of becoming a reality. One of the local preservation advocates is related to this building in the sense that it was his family business. And he has been needling the owner for all these many years, who was a developer and who had kept this property kind of on the back burner and was letting it be used by a variety of nonprofits with the idea in mind that they could do anything they wanted to because this would be a tear down eventually. So Traci's work was quite challenging from the standpoint of the condition of the building. So the reason we're really here is that despite all these many challenges, Traci and her team managed to leverage the current environment in Rochester and the pressure for growth and the creation of new high-tech industries in the Rochester downtown with the historic fabric and the stories that are behind this building to come up with an innovative plan that is the jewel of our downtown right now and is very popular. We were brought on because we are historians and historic consultants for the restoration. We're the National Register authors and worked on the part 1 of the tax credit with Traci and the team. So once we started our research, we became much more familiar with the depth and diversity of the story that went into the construction and subsequent reuse of this building. And we discovered an interesting parallel. When this building was conceived of and constructed, Rochester was in another ambitious plan to reinvent itself, and this time as a first-class manufacturing center. Rochester at the time had a number of small craft industries, was a moderate-sized, small Minnesota town. Mayo Clinic was still not even really a glimmer in anyone's eye, and we were an agricultural processing center. We had, after 1897, a wool processing mill, and the city fathers wanted, and they were fathers at that time, the city fathers wanted to diversify and find ways to make this primarily agriculturally dependent industry less so, and to develop manufacturing capability. So here was the plan. The mill would be augmented by another facility that would take the fabric that was produced, that was previously being sent to Eastern centers for sewing and cutting and fabrication of garments. They would take that fabric, keep it in Rochester, create the garments here, and distribute them to Minnesota retailers who could sell them at a lower price than what other competing companies could sell them for. So they found a man who's a Connecticut entrepreneur who proposed this building to them. It was designed by a Richmond, Virginia architect, and it looks a lot like the building we see today. This is the inside of the building as it was as a garment factory. The first floor had a pressing room, had the administrative offices, and also had a wool exchange. The second floor was for sewing, primarily women working up there, primarily men working downstairs. Wool exchange was kind of innovative because farmers could come in with their wool, and rather than selling the product, could actually exchange it for clothing if they wished to. The factory employed 60 people. It was pretty big for the standards of the time. They made 6 grades of pants and began to produce shirts and pants by 1901 when these pictures were taken. These were published in Northwest Magazine, which was a national publication. Unfortunately, the business did not really live up to expectations, and the company was bankrupt by 1903 and was put up, the building was put up for sale. In 1904, I'm having problems with this mic. In 1904, the building caught the attention of Carrie Connolly, who lived in Spring Valley and had grown up as a neighbor of Richard Sears, the founder of Sears and Roebuck, and had gotten a contract from Sears to produce cameras. They were a very small camera manufacturing company that grew very rapidly with the Sears contract, and they needed a bigger location out of Spring Valley and close to the railroad, which Rochester could provide them. And Sears really loved the idea that he could promote Rochester as the name because he was competing with the Eastman Kodak Company. So it was the Connolly Camera Company, but they put the huge sign, Rochester Camera Factory, there so they could put it in the Sears catalog and promote the idea that this was Rochester, not tell people it was Minnesota. But, so this became really huge for Rochester. The original 18 employees came from Spring Valley, and within 6 months they had 135 employees. They were producing, they grew from 2,000 cameras a month after that first 6 months to 28,000 cameras a month, with a lot of camera accessories as well. And they were looking to expand, try to acquire that lot right next to them A couple years of negotiations, they still couldn't get it, and they decided to move north, out of town, which was about 7 blocks north. And they built what was a huge factory for the time. It was the first concrete commercial building in Minnesota, actually, come to think of it. It became acquired by Mayo Clinic in, I believe, the 50s, and no longer exists. Shortly after that, they were able, the Conley Camera Company was able to sell to Maass and McAndrew, which was a small plumbing company founded by 2 men, Mr. Maass and Mr. McAndrew, in 1900 as a 2-wheeled truck, hand truck. And they did rather well, and the key to their success in these early years was work they did in the homes of the Mayo Clinic doctors, of which there were just 6 or 7 at that point, and also at St. Mary's Hospital. Mr. Maass was very innovative and became very friendly with Dr. William Mayo for being a go-to person that would help solve problems at St. Mary's. He rigged the elevator to have more safety features than it had before. He designed sink, I'll show you, that's not quite yet, but he designed a pedal for a sink that would enable it to be foot operated rather than hand operated, because the Mayos practiced aseptic surgery, which was relatively experimental at the time. It wasn't something that was widely accepted. It wasn't very well implemented in places that were trying to use it. So he did, Mr. Maass built metal furniture that would not embrace germs and contamination and could be sterilized with steam. The sink innovations, and developed this relationship, and Dr. Will Mayo financed his business when he chose to go into business with Mr. McAndrew. So over time, Maass and McAndrew would continue their relationship with Mayo Clinic, and here's the Mayo medical practice, the sinks, the furniture, etc. They continued to work with the Mayo medical practice as it grew in downtown Rochester, helping to facilitate the group practice that Mayos wanted to have. They had many expansions of St. Mary's Hospital, 5 new downtown hospitals, and the idea was that all the operating rooms would have these innovations for aseptic surgery, and they would all be functionally equivalent. So when the doctors went from operating room to operating room, they knew where things were, they knew how things worked, it was all the same. They also worked with the Mayo Clinic doctors to produce special equipment for experimental work that was being done in x-rays, in medical pathology, and in oxygen therapy. And Dr. Plummer, in particular, developed a close relationship with Mr. Maass's son, Frederick Maass, who was just a boy when he started to work in Dr. Plummer's home. And Dr. Plummer and Fred Maass seemed to have sort of a light bent in terms of being very creative, had a great imagination, and Fred was mechanically very adroit and could translate Dr. Plummer's kind of nebulous ideas into practical realities. So he was invited to work with Dr. Plummer on some of these new facilities, which would be this one here, which is Mayo Clinic's first facility, opened in 1914. It was the first building to bear the name of Mayo Clinic, and it included a lot of innovations for the time, such as 3-minute fresh air exchange that heated and cleaned and sterilized the fresh air that came in from outside, ran it through a decorative fountain in the lobby so that it would be humidified and provide patient comfort as well. In 1928, they worked on the adjacent building, which is still standing in Rochester, called the Plummer Building. And it's where that tree is there, right next to the original 1914 building. Both of those two buildings were National Historic Landmarks. This building no longer stands. The Plummer Building is still extant, as are the mechanical innovations that Fred Maass and Dr. Plummer produced, which included a pneumatic tube system that would help doctors and people in laboratories exchange records very easily, subterranean pedestrian tunnels that linked all the downtown hotels and the Mayo buildings, and the district energy project that they produced. And that's still in use today, in this kind of iconic Rochester downtown feature. In 1929, Fred Maass was hired away from Maass and McAndrew to become the clinic's first in-house engineer, and was the founder of Mayo Clinic's facilities department in so doing. Maass and McAndrew continued to work with Mayo Clinic until the mid-50s, when Fred Maass died, and they needed to sell this building to settle the estate. It was used as a home for many. The family still continued to own, part of the family still continued to own the building, and they leased it to a variety of different Rochester businesses, small businesses. This is pretty much the form that Traci and the team found it in. Maass and McAndrew had changed the front facade from the front facade that characterized the woolen factory and the Conley camera factory, and that, despite the interest and the potential significance of the other stories, dictated the direction we really needed to look in terms of our research for the National Register nomination. This building, with its blue and white mosaic at the front doors saying plumbing and heating, really told the story of Maass and McAndrew, which was not at all known at the time we started this, and was rather difficult to suss out. The saving grace was that this historic advocate, local historic advocate that had family ties to the business, had meticulously saved all the records between 1900 and 1922, and sent them over to our home office by truck. It was 2 pickup trucks full of stuff that hadn't been looked at, was not organized since the family moved out of this building. We had the support of other volunteer advocates in Rochester to help us go through these records. My partner, Steve Williams, back there, spent many hours with the respirator and a HEPA vac running while I was writing the nomination, looking for additional information that we could use. And I was lucky enough to also find construction drawings from some of the companies that had built some of the innovative features that Maass and McAndrew had designed for Mayo Clinic at other archives and in historical societies in the eastern United States. So that's pretty much my background story, and I'd like to turn it over to Traci, and she'll tell you the exciting story of what's become of this orphan building. Thanks so much.
So when Mike says this wouldn't have happened without, Jane and Steve and the work that they've done, it couldn't be further from the community. That is emphatically the truth. This building was. Can you hear me better now? Yes. Since this building was not on the registry when we purchased it, the goal was to put it on the registry, and that is what allowed us to take and make the renovations and make the changes that we did. So, and just kind of going through the revitalization, I think Jane touched a lot on this. The downtown area of Rochester is where a lot of the historic district is, and there is a lot of development that's happening in that area that is not preserving our buildings. So when we moved to Rochester in 2003, we had a technology company in Honolulu where we were from, and we were interested in taking and being downtown and in the things that were happening and be close to Mayo, and looking for that right spot. And we are passionate about taking and saving the history of Rochester. We've been coming to Rochester for 10 years, and I'm as a patient at Mayo, and needed to take and make Rochester a permanent home. And the building is, get to the fun part. The building is looking like this when we found it. And we worked with the Rochester Conservancy, who brought it to our attention that this building, which was going to be torn down, was going to become available. It was a Words Players Theater at the time, and as Jane pointed out, the building had been used for many years and activated by the community to take and use it as a theater for children, or and before that for the Maass Theater for others. So there was a lot of history of people whose children had been in this building, whose families had grown up with attending the concerts and the things that were happening, but the building itself was in utter disarray. The basement, this is a side view of it, and then you can see where it looks like now. But the building had been, the whole basement was used as storage, so it was dark and filled with every conceivable thing that a theater would ever want to save. So it was from top to bottom filled, and then all of it had paint and spray foam and holes, and it was one of those things you had to use a lot of imagination of where it could go, but it had such strong, amazing bones that it was a doable project. So let me show you in real time. This is a minute. I can activate it from here, I hope. Let's see if no, that's not gonna work. I may have to go over. Oh, no. Give me 1 second. This is 8 months of work that was done and then condensed into 1 minute of time-lapse photography of what happened in this building. And if there, as it says on the bottom, there's a 7.5 minute video that kind of goes through things in a little more detail so that you can see exactly the different stages and all the people in and out, and the elevator shed. We had to put an elevator in, another staircase in, the tiles that were upstairs, it was a dance studio upstairs, had to be removed. In certain rooms there were bathrooms, walls coming in and out. But the use of this space is was for a restaurant to go in the main floor, which it is. It's a blue duck. They're called the Blue Duck Kitchen. I'll show you some pictures of there. In the back is an event space. And the top floor is a Collider co-working space, which is a community activated space for local technology and entrepreneurs to take and get together and have a desk for visitors that are coming to Rochester, that they have a place to work. We put in high fiber optics or high fiber communications to take and make sure this had all the modern things that we need in order to take and make a building that has always been innovative, but have it now be innovative for our future. So there you can see the restaurant, Blue Dot Kitchen at the bottom. The top are 2 technology companies. One is Area 10 Labs, which is my husband and I's technology company, and then Brand 2, which is another technology company in town. So one of the amazing things was, I didn't point out in the earlier photo, but the transom windows that were in the front were all boarded up. So when we got the building, we got to pull down the boards and find these original, beautiful transom windows. Everything that was, all the wood in the building is original, and we kept all of the wood. So when we put in the restaurant, the flooring that was taken out for the restaurant was used to take and make the stairwell in the front. I'll show you some more pictures of that. The beams are original. I mean, just everything in the whole place is original. And we had the things that were damaged beyond repair, we took and had them made as replicas. The windows, so we had like 6 windows that were original. So then all the rest of the windows were created to match. And now it's a a vibrant bar and restaurant. You can see kind of it has windows that are outside. So these are all the restaurant. Upstairs, this is Collider co-working space. So you can see the beautiful wood floors that were underneath the dance studio. The amount of work that went into taking and restoring all these, the ceilings are all original. So taking and removing all the years of grime and buildup and put the skylights. Many of the skylights were boarded up, and so now we have beautiful ambient light that's throughout the building. Conference rooms, lots of glass, so that we can see the architecture of the building. Another interior conference room. So the goal is, this is modernization, and the theme of this building really has been taking the history of this amazing technology-driven building. I mean, when plumbing was first started, while plumbing doesn't always catch our eye as like the technology and new innovations, but this was coming out at a time when you didn't have, obviously indoor plumbing, and so you could go, and there was a storefront for doing that, and so this building's always been this legacy of innovation, and so now it's taking it to the next level, and then sustainability. There's nothing that's more important than taking and restoring our buildings. It's one of the most sustainable ways of preserving things, because a building that's already had all that energy and the 2-foot walls that were of brick that were in there, all of the natural resources that were in there are there. So, and preservations. So I just wanted to take a few minutes to tell you about some of the neat things that we discovered as we were looking at this building. So underneath all this drywall, there's poetry, pieces of newspaper, poetry that's written on the pillars. There's newspaper articles with Shirley Temple and other just events, local events that were found in the crawl space in the top. The stories of the people that have lived in this building and have worked in this building. John Kriesel and his father, who he grew up running through the building. There's a crawl space in the top floor, and people's children who've been dance leaders. All these people are really touched by this building, and it has been one of the most rewarding things I've ever done, is being part of taking and being a steward for this building, as it goes from something that was a jewel, then into disrepair, and now something that will live far past what, it'll pass on to the next person when long gone. We found a well, unfortunately, that was underneath in the basement. So we had to get that officially abandoned and filled in, but it was easier than we thought it was going to be. There was a lot of spray foam because it was a dance studio on the top floor. People, when they wanted to take and do some soundproofing, they just sprayed black foam all over the top floor, ceiling, so it had to be hand scraped off so you could expose the wood. The paint removal, years and years of paint on the outside of the building. We wanted to take and we want to bring it back to brick. The amount of things that you can use to take and remove the paint, we had to show that we could do it in the most gentle way possible. So things like we had a company that came in and was able to, they had all sorts of things: walnut shells, dry ice, corn husks, recycled glass, all of these things, and then just chemical strippers. So we had to show all of these that were done, which one was the gentlest way to go, and then use that method for taking off probably 10, 15 layers of paint from the bricks. Let's see what else. But what worked? So the dry ice was what worked for the inside of the building, and we needed to use paint stripping for the outside of the building. So there's different chemicals that you could try, that are used, and the first time they did it with the chemical peeling, it didn't take all the layers off, so they had to go back again and do another layer, but the dry ice was most effective for the interior wood and the most gentle. Thank you. Oh, absolutely. Leading up, and then I don't tell you what's the secret sauce. I am completely available for detailed you know, any questions, obviously reach out, because this has been, there are so many nuances to doing these kind of projects, and it is the secret, and that's actually, is having the right team. So there's no possible way any one person can do this all themselves. And Betty Construction became experts in historic restoration. We had Bill Hickey from the cities come down and be very involved in helping us look at the building and make sure that they were giving us advice on things that could be done. I have, and there's many, many more partners than this. Adam Ferrari is a wonderful architect with really sensitivity to taking and being sensitive to keeping the flavor of a building. There's a lot of patina on one of the walls, and I was thinking it would be nice to take it back down to brick. And he's like, you don't want to do that. You want to take and leave the walls looking. But it took hundreds of years, people, you know, to bring out the layers of all these different colors. So keep those, and so having the eye and appreciation for what not everything doesn't have to look new, and it shouldn't look new. It should look authentic to what it is. And I can just go down the list. SHPO's been so, Natasha, I don't know if she's still here, yes, over here, has been an amazing research. She came down, has been helpful in every step of the way. I can't emphasize enough how wonderful the State Historic Preservation Office and Natasha has been in taking and making this possible. And again, the historic tax credits that were available for the state of Minnesota and from National Park Services and the federal government are critical to take and make these projects happen, to make this project in particular happen, because you have to take and spend more money than you would have spent if you just took and turned it into a drywall building. Or torn down, and two, you create something of real value to your community. So it wouldn't happen without that. And for the city of Rochester, they did some tax increment financing. So two things: if you have a project, if you have something, I'd love to hear if there's anything I can do to help, because I can point you in directions of people that I've used and team members that have been critical. The people that I've connected with, and also the resources that are available to take and do this, both in the on the historic tax credit side as well. So I can't thank you all enough. I'll turn it over.
Jane just mentioned that the project is actually going to receive an award from the Preservation Alliance of Minnesota. October 9th, I think it's their annual event, right? Yeah, their gala. Yeah, so congratulations on that. Really great project. We're going to move from the big city of Rochester to rural Kenyon, and Jill Palof is going to tell us about a really wonderful church that she's been heavily involved in restoring for a long time. Jill is on the board of directors of the Friends of St. Rose, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the preservation of St. Rose Church outside of Kenyon. And I'm going to read a quote from her bio statement that's on the church's website. Living a mile away, I feel a strong sense of responsibility, pride, and commitment towards saving St. Rose. It's a privilege to share this piece of Minnesota pioneer history with others, as well as educate future generations about the value that these early settlers placed on faith and family. I truly believe it's our obligation to respectfully preserve and restore St. Rose so that others can experience our treasured past, end quote. And I think that nicely summarizes the perspective that Jill brings along with the other board members, and that's why I was motivated to reach out to them and have them come and tell us about their amazing preservation project. So, anyway.
Thank you, Michael. As you said, my name is Jill Palof, and I live 25 miles north and west of Rochester. I've known Jane for many years. She actually helped us with our National Register designation. And I've actually been to the building that they just talked about as a person who witnessed theater productions, high school graduations, and I ate at the Blue Duck Cafe or Kitchen for Mother's Day this year. So very cool to see how that's come along. And I'm going to sit down because I need to read my notes from there and steer from here, so. And now I might need a hand with the mic. You must work in the theater. A little bit. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, I'm gonna have to look. This might be a little tricky, so I have to go through here, to go up to there. Okay. Church of St. Rose of Lima. Oh, I missed this, something happened here. That's St. Rose and the sunset when we first began. St. Rose of Lima was built in 1878 by Irish Catholic immigrants that moved to southeast Minnesota after a long journey across the ocean through several states. Families losing their parents along the way, coming here as young adults to settle in this area. They did not come through St. Paul. They didn't come through Ellis Island. They came mostly through Canada and had barely anything left when they got here. This shows you, we are right in the center of that circle on the map. That is the border of Dodge County and Goodhue County. We're on the Goodhue County side in the middle of, or at the very southern end of Cherry Grove Township. This is I had a feeling I might have a hard time with this coordinating. The stone church was erected in 1878 by Reverend J. Steria of Red Wing and was a mission assigned to Bell Creek until 1890, and then to Pine Island until 1939 when it was attached to Zumbrota. And this is from the Archdiocese records when we started this journey. We met with the Archdiocese. They were able to find the articles of incorporation that included all of the information we never knew for sure. It was incorporated on October 9th, 1882. Signatures on the Articles of Incorporation included Thomas Grace, who was the bishop at the time. He's the bishop before Archbishop Ireland, and it was not an archdiocese yet. And Father Augustin Rayu was French. And then the pastor at the time, he's the second pastor at St. Rose, Father Hugh McDivitt. And then I'm gonna go back. Another signature on there that's interesting. The two lay members of the church were John Henry and Hugh Vallely, and yes, John Henry was his real name. This is an aerial photo of St. Rose. I wanted to mention that St. Rose is constructed of quarry face ashlar limestone. The architectural classification is a gable-fronted neoclassical church with entrance tower. The tuck point mortar came from a parishioner at a lime kiln on his property, Martin Wunderlich, just south of the church in section 34 of Cherry Grove Township. The limestone to construct the church came from the land of Thomas O'Kane, who's on the left, and that's actually the property right across the street from our farm, which is located 1 mile to the east of the church. To the right is Samuel and Mary Tunks. Samuel was a stonemason that built the church using the trade skills he brought from the homeland. This is a letter that was found in a Bible up in the attic of the rectory in Zumbrota. That was the family Tunks Bible, we believe. It was printed in 1848, and it was from New York, and they did come through New York, the Tunks did, to get there. But it's pretty interesting. It says Marianne Pendergast was born in County Tipperary, Ireland, May 1832, came to America in 1850, settling in Essex County, New York, where she was married to Samuel Tunks in 1852. To them were born 7 children, 4 of whom are still living. Together with this family, they settled in Minnesota in 1869, where she has resided ever since. Her husband died in 1887, and that's her husband, Samuel Tunks, was a stonemason. So when we found this little piece of paper up in an attic in a dusty old box, we were pretty excited to find that. St. Rose soon became a local source of pride in Cherry Grove Township, as evidenced in this 1892 wedding announcement. It reads, "At the appointed hour, The St. Rose Church was crowded to capacity with the friends of both parties. The church was beautifully decorated for the occasion. Flowers were here and there, and on every hand, beautiful vases. And this is the part I like the best. It says, the bride made her appearance leaning on her father's arm. We do not wish to flatter, but Katie will certainly never see the day as she will look as she did on her wedding day. Nice. Just to point out, the Irish that came to Cherry Grove did not have a whole lot. They built this beautiful church, and this is what the children of Cherry Grove looked like before the Depression even happened. So the fact that they built this beautiful church when they lived with so little was quite a testament to what they felt as far as the pride of this building and how important it was to their lives. St. Rose became a place where many sacraments were held, other than weddings, of course. And over the years, this picture was taken in the early 1930s with this is Lucinda when she was born in 1925, so that's how we can date the photo being in the early 1930s, because she would have been about second grade. The sisters in the back here are Ursuline sisters from Frontenac, from the Villa Maria, and many of you probably know what that is. And they would only come for special occasions. They weren't there all the time by any means. Mass was only said in Latin the entire time St. Rose was open, and this picture is taken in the mid-1930s because we know who that altar boy is. That's John McCain. This photo is taken, go back. This photo is of Tom Comstock leading a procession into St. Rose. He was born in 1934, so that places this in the early 1940s. And this is a photo that somebody found on eBay and gave to us. We don't have a date on it, but it was really cool to have the picture. We're not sure if that was right before or after it closed, but it had to be fairly close to the 1961 timeframe. This is a 1947 wedding that shows how ornate it was inside. There were paintings all throughout. There was a lot of decorative stenciling and a lot of ornamental garnishments all over the church. This is probably taken at the same time as the wedding because that candle is bent the same way it is in the wedding pictures, so that's how we think it's probably the same year as 1947. Here's a wedding. This is one of only 2 color photographs we have because of when the church closed. There weren't too many people with color cameras yet, and this was taken in 1955. And this is the last wedding that happened at St. Rose. It was in 1960 with James and Anna Meyer. And down here you'll see Father Thomas Kavanaugh was the presider that day. And here's a picture of Father Kavanaugh with his dog Brutus. Brutus was known to be his companion out at St. Rose quite often, and one man who was one of the altar boys said he remembered the sound of Brutus's toenails clicking up and down the center of the church, running back and forth. This is a picture that was taken after the church closed, but it shows you one of the tragedies that happened at the end of the era of St. Rose. These are not the original altars. These were put in about 1.5 years before the church closed by Father Kavanaugh that you just saw. And at the time that he decided to do this, none of the parishioners were aware this was happening. He actually got a hold of a senior in high school who was an altar boy at the time and asked him to come out to the church, carry out the original altars that had been there for 80-some years, and burn them on the side of the hill between one Sunday Mass and the next Sunday Mass, which was a heartbreak of the community at St. Rose. As new Catholic churches were built in neighboring towns, car simplified travel, and St. Rose experienced a gradual decline in its membership. After 83 years of worship, the last Mass was held by Father Kavanaugh on June 4th, 1961. On this day, St. Rose closed its doors and the church sat unused and unlocked for the next 40 years. 33 years later, in 1994, is when I moved to Cherry Grove Township. This church was built before I was even born, and living so close to it, I couldn't believe how sad it made me feel to see this as I drove by. This had been abandoned for, like I said, over 40 years. And it kind of pulled at my heartstrings that this was sitting there. The stone looked like it was in amazing shape, but the rest of the building was falling apart. So I reached out to our parish priest in Pine Island, who was also the priest in Zimborna that was overseeing the cemetery records and had the connection with the Archdiocese for this building, and asked if there's anybody or any way that this could be saved. And I kept getting no, 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 until I think I asked too many questions. And the cemetery board got a call from the Archdiocese that the building was going to be raised. I guess as it turns out, it was so far to the outside edge of the Archdiocese, they forgot it was even there. And normally Catholic churches are torn down within a year of closure. And I'm not sure if they just forgot about it or what happened, but as soon as we started asking questions, they were going to tear the building down. But fortunately, as it turns out, I wasn't the only person that was thinking this. And in fact, Doug Oman stopped by and took a few pictures when he was writing his book, Churches of Minnesota. This did not make the book, but it showed that there were people even outside of this area that were interested. There was a priest after the church closed that liked this old church and put on marine plywood to cover up the windows. That actually saved a lot of the stained glass from falling apart. And as the marine plywood covers failed in the late 1990s, almost all hope was lost, and Mother Nature, of course, had her grips on the church. So this is what it looked like before we started. The inside of the church had experienced its share of active members over the past 40 years of closure, but these residents had fur and 4 legs. There was also a robin that had built her nest up here that was active when I very first walked into the church, which, like I said, was unlocked. I actually got the permission of the cemetery board and went in with them to see what the church looked like. But you can see it's suffering from peeling paint and all kinds of age-related issues. Another thing that was hard not to miss is the presence of all the footprints of critters trying to take a look over the balcony. And keep in mind, this is all boarded up, so it's very dark inside, and only the flash of the photography that we took showed what was there. Otherwise, it's very dark. This window is the only window that was missing, and when we took off the marine plywood cover, that's what brought the light in to show more of what was going on. Another tragedy is there was a statue of St. Joseph, and he obviously fell over at some point, and his head broke off. And years later, somebody brought it back and left it on the seat of the lawnmower, and almost scared me out of my mind when I came around the corner. To see someone's face sitting on a lawnmower staring at you when you come around the corner is very frightening. So even the half-moon window that bared the name of the church, and it says 1878, was barely visible, was a sign of how sad it was getting. So there's the missing window. One of our board members wrote in our first newsletter that when God closes a door, like the front door is being closed, He opens a window. So that was pretty nice. So what started all this? It was a crisis, actually, because the Archdiocese was serious about tearing it down. They didn't want the liability, I'm sure. And it took that crisis to motivate people that I didn't know. We didn't know each other. Scott Groth is one of our original board members that the day before the due date, he applied for the 10 most endangered properties and asked and put information in about St. Rose all by himself, and actually got on the 10 most endangered properties. That was quite amazing that he made that feat. So 4 months after this endangered properties listing, this spurred all of us getting to be in contact with each other. It turned out there was a few people that were interested in saving St. Rose. In June of 2002, a group of about 8 people met at my house, and we met for the first time. This was the first day that I had met Scott Groth, who was the person that did the work for the 10 most endangered properties, and Kay Williams, who was another original board member. And I want to point out that all 3 of us, turn so I can look at you, all 3 of us have no ties to this church. We're not from around the area. But all 3 of us felt very strongly that we could do this. And so we were complete strangers that within a matter of an hour or 2 decided we were going to undertake a preservation project that turned out to be quite large.
So we decided to have a public meeting with the past parishioners that we could find out were still alive and around, and ask them for their input and what they thought. And it was an overwhelming positive response. We were very happy that if we had the support of the people that this meant the most to, then we could keep going. And this is a picture of all these people in this picture went to church there, and almost all of them are gone today. That's only been 15 years, but they're amazing people. So it felt like forever. We were able to get a meeting with Archbishop Flynn in January of 2003, and by October of that year, he wrote a decree allowing us to purchase the church for just $1 and still allow Catholic sacraments to happen, which was one of the main points that Archbishop Flynn and the people that used to go to church there wanted to make sure Catholics could still use the space, along with the general public. So that was quite a feat, and in fact, that's probably been the most amazing thing that I've received phone calls from coast to coast about, is how did you ever get a Catholic church to allow you to keep having sacraments when it's a historic site? So that was quite an undertaking, and it's thanks to Archbishop Flynn really for making that possible. So these are the letters that we received from Sister Dominica Brennan telling us that it was going to happen, and the priest also received a letter that said that he was in charge of keeping the records for anything Catholic that happens at the church, but acknowledges that this church is now a historic site, is a site that will be used for non-Catholic events and services or get-togethers as well. So it worked out perfectly. So now that we own the church for $1, the first thing we had to do was start from the top down and restore the roof. This is what it looked like the day before we started the roof project. We had one of those March snowstorms, of course, right when we were going to get started. And as most critical preservation journeys begin, you need to have somebody who's willing to put something forward to make an attractive offer. An anonymous donor came forward with a $10,000 matching fund, which was more money than any of us could ever dream of because we had no money in the bank. But we knew we had to start with a roof. And this was not an elegant project, we realized that, but surprisingly enough, we sent out a letter to the past members, and our mailing list was only 50 to 75 names. And with our small mailing list, we were able to raise $45,000 it took to start this project. It was quite amazing. We did the match and then some. It also included putting in new copper flashing, paint repairs, and exterior cove molding repair. For some reason, on the street side of the church, they put these asphalt shingles on top of the cedar shingles, and that was the only place they did it. And I don't know if it was because there was water starting to come in or they just wanted to make it look better from the road. But we found the receipt from this, and it was done after the church closed, actually, for only $200. So we hired River City Builders from Nurstrand to install the cedar shingles. They used the #1 grade, and every single shingle is put in by hand with nails. There's no power tools used to do this whole restoration. And there's copper flashing going in. And there they are. There's the molding and trim getting fixed. So even though we just began our preservation journey, we knew we'd achieved a critical preservation need by restoring the roof. Next was our sanctuary ceiling. Now you can see the blue paint was actually added at the same time they had the plywood altars put in 1958, so it was new when the church closed, but it had fallen into quite a bit of disrepair. And that's our board member, Kay William and Scott Groth up there scraping the ceilings to get that blue paint off. And then to help keep the cracks from getting any bigger, we hired this step out, which was necessary to keep it all intact. And while we were up there, we uncovered some scripture passages. It says, "Be with 2 E's, be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee the crown of life." So that was a pretty exciting find because that had been painted over for many, many years. And when we were done, we were pretty proud of what we found. And in the back here, it also said, "If you love me, keep my commandments." So we kept what was left of that, so we knew where the starting point was for the restoration to come. In the back, we had a problem with the door was unfunctional. The steps were all crumbling. They weren't this bad, but they were close. So we put in, with volunteers, new steps right away. And all of this was volunteer donated labor from 2 brothers, Mark Bronner and his brother Ed. And they, all along the way, our preservation journey has been one of volunteers helping to preserve something that they all feel passionate about. And this is a good example of it. And this is our temporary handrail that lasted for 10 years. Just like any other project, you think you're gonna get back on it, but. So then the ceiling was taken care of in the sanctuary, but not in the nave of the church. So you can see here all the peeling paint we still had. And between having different functions and events, we always had to clean all the lead paint chips off the pews. So we thought we need to get going on that one before we start working. So we went from the front of the altar back on the ceiling to get all that restored before we came from the top down. So once again, we were able to get the help of Mark Bronner, the person that helped with the cement, and he erected the scaffolding set that was quite amazing. It has 6 towers and gave us a floor up above the choir loft so that we could reach the ceiling. This was quite an amazing undertaking to get that even up there. This is a man who went to church and as a little boy, Hugh O'Kane, he's from St. Paul, and he brought out people, I believe they were homeless, from St. Paul to help do this work, and I think he ended up paying them on the side, but he never told us, but he brought out a crew of men to help. And as we were up there, we found all of this underneath the paint, and at the time, sadly, we didn't know, but we had a trompe-l'oeil ceiling above us. We had no idea that that's what it was. So the trompe-l'oeil stretched all the way across. You can see where it starts here, and there's everywhere there's a column in the church, it stretches across. And this was where we came in and out to work up there. We also found underneath the paint scripture passages all the way around above the dental molding, and so we traced it on plastic so that we could record it for further restoration if we get to that point. And this is a fabric mesh that will not hurt the ceiling itself, but it held the integrity of the structure so that we didn't have failing lath and plaster starting to fall. So the hope is to someday go back and restore the trompe-l'oeil, but at least now we're not going to lose the ceiling itself. We didn't have any electricity, of course, when we started, and we put in minimal electricity just to get through the first projects. But then it came time to update all of the wiring, put in a new furnace. This is our basement, the way you get in. And then we also insulated above the attic. So here's what it looks like in the attic before insulation. And surprisingly, the raccoons and critters had not moved into there, so we put in this mesh area so they couldn't ever get in there to make their home on top of the insulation. So we hired Dave's Insulation, and yes, that's Dave, he didn't want his picture taken. And here's the tubing it took to go all the way up, the 3 levels up into the bell tower. The storm windows were in really tough shape, of course. This is all original wood storms that they put on right after they must have put on the stained glass. They had Roman numerals scratched in the bottom of each one, and they had, there was the storm window that went in the front here was found when we were crawling around doing the electric, so that was a good find. But we took off the storms so that we could strip them down. And we also stripped around all the windows. This was a much larger project than we ever expected. And yes, there's a bullet hole here that some hunter, I think they must have taken aim at the center of the window, but we did get that eventually fixed. But here we are meticulously scraping, and we found out that there were no nails in any of the construction of the storms. It was all mortise and tenon and pegs, which was pretty cool. There were no metal forged nails in the whole storm window construction. So here we are. We had 1 missing window and 1 broken window. And the story is, this is where the stairs go up to the choir loft that a critter tried to jump out through the window and broke through it. And they found it in between the storm and the stained glass years ago. So those are our 2 biggest expenses for windows. So here's our new storms with the glass all reglazed. And that's what it looked like when we put it back on. So it really brightened it up. And then we went ahead and bought these Alumicore, which are very light aluminum covers to protect the plate glass and the stained glass a little better. Because in Minnesota you have a lot of hailstorms, especially lately. Probably the one project we were really afraid was going to be really expensive was stained glass restoration. This is what the hole looked like from the outside on that window, and on the inside. There's the window that was missing the middle medallion. There it is again. So we put out a newsletter and made a call for donations for stained glass, and we ahead of time went to 3 different stained glass companies, found the lowest bidder, put in a newsletter that this is how much each window costs by a window, thinking that maybe 1 or 2 windows would get done a year and we'd have this done in maybe 5 or 10 years. And instead, this over $30,000 price tag was taken care of in 2 months. We had so many donations come in and so many people tried to preserve certain windows that either were family related or no family relation at all, which about half the windows, the people that paid for them had no connection with the church. Some windows had as many as 30 or 40 donors, other windows had 2 or 3. But we were able to, in 2 months of actually calling each other, making sure we weren't committing the same window to 2 different parties, had all the stained glass money we needed to re-lead all of these windows, which was really amazing. I mean, we had holes over here and there, that's just a piece of blue tape. That's what it looked like on the outside. So see, there was a great need with all these fractures and the sagging lead. That was something we had to do. So here's one of the most nervous days of my life out there, was watching these guys take the windows out. They did 4 at a time. And then once they removed all the windows on the south and west side, we saw how bad the woodwork looked, because when you have colored glass, you don't see, you don't know how terrible everything really looks until you get good lighting in there. Because until that point, we still had the storm covers on for the most part year-round. So you probably know what they do with stained glass, since you're all historic preservationists, but it's really a fascinating process. They catalog everything, they wash each piece, even with little toothbrushes, get them all clean, put them in drawers, put them back exactly where they took them out of the leading, and put them in these racks for storage until they're ready to re-lead, and then they come back. And this is the second most nervous day about the window restorations, when they come back carrying these, because they're quite flexible. Lead is not rigid, lead is very flexible. So yeah, having pews doesn't help you put a sturdy ladder in. That was another very nerve-wracking part, but fortunately we got all 9 stained glass windows when you count the half moon window put back in, copper wire ties to hold the support bars. And this is what it looked like after they're done. And the bullet hole, they had to repaint that. And they did a really good job. It really looks exactly like the original picture. There, that's where the bullet hole was, and you would never know. They did a great job. So these windows appraised for a whole lot of money because of the old world glass. We had to figure out what the medallion was in this window that was missing. And we found a book that had pictures of all the other windows on the same 2 pages. So we made an educated guess. I was going to say this: the altar had the lamb on top of the book with the seals above the tabernacle, and we thought, well, that would be a good one. No one could remember what that was in there. And we had to pick the surrounding collar around the medallion to match it as well. So there's Samuel Tunk's window along with J.P. O'Kane. And this is what it looked like when they were done. Turned out just beautiful. And this never had any wording up in the top, and we know that from old photographs, but that was restored. So I'm sure I'm running late on time. So this entrance has been a point of dispute.
How much? A minute.
Okay, here we go. This is curious. Here we go. Before and after of the cover. Cover. Yep. Here's a ultimate organ donation. This was the original organ that we were able to get returned to the church. Nobody was hurt in this process. We started the Trump Loy restoration. This is Helen Disted. She has donated all of her time and materials to bring this back. We've had quite a few weddings out at St. Rose. We needed more parking installed, and this man here, after we took all the trees out of the parking area, we made the boards to put the bell tower back together out of the lumber we took out of the parking lot. We hired a crabby old man with a cat to come out and help us. He's a self-proclaimed crabby old man. And then all the other toys that are out here are from people that volunteered their time. I'm gonna have to just go through without, let me just go faster, so.
That's a big parking lot.
We had to have the stonework fixed. There's all kinds of pictures here. I could not tell how late I was running, so I apologize. This is Christoph, he's from Germany. He is a stonemason that helped us repair those stones. And then he came back and fixed all of our tuck pointing using hydraulic line at the bottom to help the water work correctly. And we took out of the old cement. That's his tuck pointing skills at work, keeping the joints moist and then doing the final touches. And that's what it looks like when it's done. This is another scary project for me. Are the Canby Theater people okay if I just finish going through these? Okay, we got 2 thumbs up. This is Mark. This is up in the bell tower looking south. This was more scaffolding we constructed to get this project done, and that was the final product. We had one door that was off its hinges. We have a candlelight service, and we got that done just in time for that one year. Now here's another project that is quite an undertaking with woodpeckers living up there, and an American kestrel had its nest at the top. There's no babies harmed when we did this. So this is up there taking off shingles. This is 100% volunteer everything. None of this was paid labor or equipment. It's all volunteer. Cedar shingles again. That's what the bird's nest looked like underneath the finial, and that's what it looked like when it came down. That's when he was finished. The floor, once we restored the floor, we found old paint colors underneath. It smelled much better in there after we took care of the floor. We put in new handrails because that was one of the bigger complaints we had from elderly people that come to visit us. We didn't have good handrails. Now, there's a bee right here, and this is a honeybee, which my husband said, I think you have honeybees at St. Rose. I said, no, we don't. Up in here, he brought me around the corner, he said, I think you have bees. I said, no, we don't have bees, it's probably hornets. And then this is looking closer, so I showed it to the man I work with that won first place for Minnesota State Fair Honey in 2015, and he said, yeah, those are honeybees. And that's him, that's Mike. We hired him actually to come out and move the hive to his apiary, and he has since put a steeple on top of the hive out in Scandinavia. And the queen bee is named Rose. But we thought we might have 10,000 honeybees. We had more like 70 or 80,000 honeybees living up in here. That's 2 or 3 years worth of bees. Yeah, it was quite shocking. When we found honey dripping in this sanctuary, we thought we had a problem. We had no idea it was that much of a problem. So here they are. You can see thousands of bees flying around them. They're looking for the queen, and they're looking for the queen. Oh, and look at the knife they use to cut out the comb, the lobes. So this was all last summer. The honey tasted amazingly good. He said it was so pure and so good, and these bees are so, they don't have the mites of the disease. We would have won state fair first prize this year if we would have entered our honey. And that's what it looks like today. So right now, we're working on, we started last winter working on the sacristy. We found some historic wallpaper underneath there. We had to take out the floor because it was so rotted. It was so bouncy and rotted that we actually had to go in and do this work. And I'm almost done here. This is getting to the end. So this is the hill where the altars had been burned. This is also the area where we harvested all the trees to put the wood up here, and we're going to use more of that lumber to make the altars again to match the original altars. And we have all the CAD drawings done by volunteers once again. We're going to put the cross back up on top of the steeple. And just recently we had a grant from Minnesota, thanks to the Minnesota Historical Society, to get a designation sign. So this tells the story of St. Rose. So if you're out in the countryside and you want to take a nice drive out. You can come and see St. Rose, wonder what it was like when the pioneers looked up at this church, because the views, everything looked just the same as it did when the church was built. You can take a stroll in the cemetery, stop and smell the roses, read about the Irish pioneers, see the views they saw. And one of the quotes is from St. Rose that says, as a grace has increased, so do the struggles. And as much as this has been a struggle to get through, the reward has been very much worthwhile. Thank you very much for your time. We included a bunch of extra newsletters that are available in the back if you want to take a newsletter on your way out. And that's it. Thank you.
Because he said he's trying to be a national interest. I gave him the email.
All right, so we're going to move from rural Kenya to the small town of Canby, so that you guys can hear about the amazing Canby Theater restoration project. And Mike Tesh grew up in Canby and still lives there. And when he's not working in his real job, which pays the mortgage, he's the sort of lead volunteer on the Canby Theater project, and he's the manager of the theater as well. And then with Mike is Jeff Ferguson, who also grew up on a farm just outside Canby, but he worked in Minneapolis for a couple of decades and just recently moved back. So the two of them are going to do a tag team on this project.
Hi there. It's great to meet you today. I love to represent the Canby Theater. I love what everybody here has done today. It's fabulous and wonderful. I grew up in Canby. I love the Canby Theater. I remember as a child going there. Some of your earliest memories come from going to the movies, and that's where it all began, my love of the theater. Through the years, I had relatives that worked there. My brother-in-law and my cousin both worked there. 1990 came, and I was in high school, and they asked me to come work there, and it seemed like a perfect fit, and it truly was. I stayed there through 2008. It had changed ownership, and I felt it wasn't the perfect fit. The theater became in really rough shape from that point on when the next person took over, and after several years it did close. It was closed for a year or two. The city looked at restoring it, bringing it forward for the next generation to enjoy. And they came to me and asked me if they just wanted to confer with me and see, what I thought should be done, which direction we should go on a lot of things. And it grew from that constantly. And it really became something else until the point where I was truly involved where we are today. And it's my second job, but first in my heart. As you can see, 1939 is when it was built. They went through lots of problems trying to get it built with the problems that were occurring in the country at that time. They had to go to, I believe, 4 concrete companies to get enough concrete in order to actually build the building. Beautiful Art Deco structure. I'm going to continue on. The interior of the theater, when we were looking at redoing it, we decided that how it was originally designed wouldn't work for modern sound. So we decided to develop it differently. We did stick with the same exact design on the exterior and are still working at trying to do that. We have our windows and doors yet to do outside, and we hope that those are up yet and coming. Very beautiful. There's our original lobby. Originally, there was minimal food. It expanded in the late 40s and early 50s to a concession stand, and now we've rebuilt that concession stand in a different way. Walls have moved. There's been a lot of change through the building through the years, so it's a lot of which direction do you go with things. The exterior we're trying to keep as original as possible. Everything else is in flux. That's a picture of our upstairs lounge, which is very beautiful. We haven't started doing that yet. That is this winter's project that we're going to start. We're going to work on our balcony and our lounge. That is our next step. And very, very excited about that. There's a scene, I believe, from the 1950s of the exterior of the theater. My cohort, Jeff Ferguson here, has done an amazing job at helping. I was at my real job and I did what I could. He kind of started working on his own and did an awful lot of work driving back from the cities to work on that every weekend and weekend, and did an amazing job and took care of himself. He had a few questions, and it was really a community effort. There was nearly 50 volunteers. We all stepped up. Nobody got any pay. This is all funded money and donations. It's near to my heart, and I just truly love it. And I would like you to come to the movies sometime. It's wonderful. We do a classic film festival each fall that runs September and October. Lots of fun. We have bands play. We got a band playing there this Saturday night rather. It's really true to my heart. I'm probably going to switch it over here to Jeffrey. He's going to talk a lot about the restoration, a lot of the things that we did. I thank all the families that owned it and took care of it this long and got it to where we're today. It's an integral part of our community. I absolutely love it. I loved it as a child. I love it just as much now. Jeffrey.
So, when I first started working on the theater project, when I was not there, I was always looking for pictures on eBay or other places of old pictures from the city street, because that was always sort of, people whenever they came through town took pictures of the marquee. It was very much a central part of the community, so I couldn't really see this theater not being there. It was just, without that there, I thought it would just, the whole town would just look different. So when Mike started working on the restoration, I volunteered, raised my hand to tackle the marquee. I really didn't know what I was getting into, otherwise I probably would have done it. But I've worked with my father restoring cars and fixing things over the years, so I felt like paint and metal and welding and fabricating stuff was something I could do. So you can see a little of the interior when we started. There was a lot of water damage over the years. It was in a very disrepair here. So this was kind of the interior when we started as well. We started taking up some of the seats. So all this was kind of, there was a lot of volunteers, a lot of people from the city were working on doing a lot of the interior stuff while I was working outside. As I do photography for a living, but I don't have near as many great pictures as our last presenter because I was working, so I couldn't do that. So I did take a few. This is when I first started on the marquee. People had kind of done a little upkeep over the years, but it was very much, it was close to not being restorable after much longer. There was places where it was rusting through. We actually had to replace a lot of the bottom, had rusted away, but the city pulled up with their boom truck and said, here you go, and I just got up in there and started working on it. I couldn't sandblast, so I had to sand everything. So I did everything with a DA sander, and I didn't have to bring it all the way down in most places. I could just kind of scuff it up, and get it kind of ready to go, and then I could I didn't have to replace a lot of the stuff on the top. Some of the pieces, there's a piece across the top. You can see it on the far left there. It was pretty much destroyed. It was rusted in a lot of places and sheared in a lot of other places. So we had a local shop refabricate a piece of metal that was very similar, and then I trimmed it down and started punching holes in it and for all the lights and getting it so it would fit in there again. And you can see across the bottom on the side here, we had to cut the entire underside of the marquee off, because most of the stuff I could take off and take back to the shop, but I couldn't take the whole thing with me. So we ended up cutting a piece off and taking that again to a shop and having it refabricated. And then welding it back on. You can see the pieces there, and then at the top, that's when we finished kind of, it was almost done, getting it all done, put back on. I worked with another close friend of mine in the community that has a shop and paints lots of vehicles and helps me when I do a lot of my projects. And we sat down and found a good sign paint that was going to hold up and last a very long time, because I did not want to be doing this again. And so we found something that was really durable. Again, I could not spray, so I had to actually put this all on by roller. And once you start painting, you got to keep going at it to get all your coats on. Otherwise, I'd have to sand again. So there were many nights where I had lights out there and we were just working into the night. But I sat down with Mike and we did change a little bit of the color scheme. The main colors were the same, but some of the blacks around the edges over the years, they were white at one point, I think. And
We went back to if you look way back, I believe we went to where it belonged.
Yeah, the very original. And then when I finished working on that, then they came in and they put in the neon. And a lot of the neon that was on the marquee hadn't been working in my lifetime. So I had maybe seen a little bit of it when I was little, but most of it had been broken for many, many years. So again, and then on the inside, they were continuing to take out all the seats and put in new seats. They ran a fundraiser where people could come in and sponsor a seat. My mom thinks that she owns that seat, so it's got her name on it. She feels like she's the only one that can sit there. But this is when the seats were getting almost all out, and then they started taking care of the edges. And there was, again, all volunteers and city workers, and lots of people came in to make this happen. And I found out after we were finishing up the project that the mayor came and told me that when we started doing the marquee, that a lot of the community then really gathered a lot of interest, and people could see that there was things happening, so people started donating and people asking how they could help, and it's one of the, I don't know, the community really came together on it. It's one of the projects I've never seen so many people all in unison really wanting it to succeed and see it be restored again. This is working on, we had to paint the ceiling all black, like most theaters do now. Getting it ready to put for the sound system coming in, and then cleaning it up for the new seats. This was the front lobby, starting to tear that apart, take out the old concession stand, and then they were tearing that all up. And then starting to build a new one in a different location, but and then lots of volunteers came in to paint, and it seemed like it was a never-ending painting job. Everything needed to be re-sealed and repainted. Then we put up a lot of poster cases, backlit poster cases, and to try to give it a little bit of a modern feel, but it still retained a lot of the classic looks for it. Once the marquee was then all finished and the Palof came in, they're a local electrician, they came in and they spent just a ton of time wiring, and I mean, there was just rat's nests of wires, and they modernized everything, and just, they really got it working well again. And we were kind of right down to the wire we wanted to get the marquee done. The theater wasn't going to be ready, but for the 75th anniversary, we wanted to be able to light up the marquee. So they were working all the days before, and then we came in the night and kind of did the finishing touches, put some of the marquee back together. And to be honest, we got to turn on the marquee like it was like midnight the night before we were actually going to officially turn it on, and that was something I'll never forget. Just seeing the neon lit up and the whole marquee. There's nobody in town at midnight at Canby, so we were just standing on the street watching the marquee. It was really something. So the next day there was a snowstorm, but people turned out like crazy to come see it, just to see this get lit up. And I had my oldest son on my shoulders and took this photo as everybody was going back in. And so that was the first time it got lit up after we were restoring it. This is inside now with the new seats. I took this morning at 3 o'clock. It was about 3 hours from here, so we had a long drive. This is the new concession stand up front. And then we've got all new digital projection systems, and we've had to go through a lot of learning to keep that all going, and it's an interesting process. It's really fun to be able to load these, and I'm guessing right about now my wife is loading some movies for today and for tomorrow. So, and she's been great at letting me work on this project, and she volunteers a ton there too. And like Mike was saying, we've done a lot of events since then. We've brought back a lot of things that people really enjoyed, like the White Side Walls. That was a local or a band that's common around Minnesota, and they play a lot of oldie stuff. The line was out around the block for that. That was one of the first times they came back to play. So it was really a big deal for a lot of people who had remembered seeing them there before. That's them inside. It was definitely a full house. We've got, actually this Saturday we're doing our 3rd annual car show, and we play some classic car films, and it falls in line with the classics that Mike talked about. And that's the poster of the classics. I don't know if Mike wants to talk a little bit more about that.
Not too much, just what we're coming.
Yeah. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I just kind of raced through that, but yeah, we're still working on a few things. Like Mike said, the doors and stuff are in the front, and we're always working on something. I've learned a ton researching about this. Mike would call me every now and then, and just the letters alone on the marquee were fairly rare, and we didn't have a ton of them. And I was always on eBay buying different letters here and there. One place actually, when they just went out of business, they called me and they said, "We have about 200 letters left. You're the only one who ever buys these. You buy them in bulk from us." So I was like, all right. So I've got boxes of marquee letters at home that I'm still getting restored. So it's definitely been a labor of love for me as well. Like I said, like Mike said, he grew up here, I grew up there, and movies were kind of the escape from the small town. You could go out and see them, and so it was always kind of a special place for me. I never worked there growing up, but I spent a lot of time there, and it was friends with Mike, so I'd always visit. Like I said, I like to help out as much as I can, and like to restore things like this and keep them. And hopefully I won't have to do much more. My kids can restore it again if that's the case. But that's pretty much it.